There's a lot to like about Marcus Yarn's game, and I can definitely understand if he becomes a trendy sleeper running back in the weeks leading up to an NFL draft. Hey y'all! For this video, we'll be continuing going through the 2025 running back prospects covering Marcus Yarns from Delaware, Mario Anderson Jr. from Memphis, Marquez Cooper from San Diego State, Montrell Johnson Jr. from Florida, and Ollie Gordon II from Oklahoma State. If you're new to these, my running back evals use some different grading methods, which if you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of the series, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details on how I do my grading in that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the running backs from last year for reference, you can check out the link that should be in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scouting reports out for Ashton Jeanty, Bashal Toon, Cam Skabu, Damian Martinez, Devin Neal, DJ Giddens, Dylan Sampson, Jordan James, Caleb Johnson, and more, which you can check out on my channel. I'll be continuing to go through my top 35 running backs in the draft, so to be sure you don't miss any other parts of the running back series or any other position group series in the future, be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Yarns. Also, before we get started, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I'm a contributor for DLF or DynastyLeagueFootball.com. If you haven't used DLF or want to try to use their premium service, new users can use my discount code BACKSEAT99 in all caps to sign up for DLF Premium for just 99 cents for the first month. That will give you access to all the articles, rankings, tools, and more. Now, I've also mentioned this before, but I always want to make sure I do repeat this just to make it clear. That makes DLF Premium 99 cents for the first month. And if you don't like it, you can cancel it within that first month and not be charged more than 99 cents. But if you do forget to cancel it after the first month, or you just want to continue having it and using it, it'll be $12.99 every month after the first month. Before we get into Yarn's basic stats, I do just want to let everyone know out of transparency that I had the least amount of tape for him out of any other running back in this group. I'm at the mercy of what I can find on YouTube and other sources, and shockingly, there isn't a huge supply and demand for Delaware tape. But anyways, Yarns had a pretty productive year, rushing for 844 yards and 6 touchdowns on 133 carries, which would have been higher had he not missed 2 games due to injury. But with that production, he was able to rush for a yards per carry of 6.3, which is great. To be fair though, I would hope if we're going to be talking about a possible NFL prospect playing the FCS, that he would be that productive. Regardless, what was also great to see was him having 0 fumbles and also having 297 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns, albeit on just 17 receptions. As for his highlight games, maybe I'm going to out myself as well, but I don't regularly watch FCS football, so I wasn't really sure which teams were best to include here. I had to just base it off of teams that I recognize from other recent draft prospects, or just based on their 2024 standings. Either way, he was productive in all the highlighted games and rushed for over 100 yards in all of them, and had over 40 yards receiving in all but one of them. Which, again, I hope if we're talking about a possible NFL level player, he is capable of good production at the FCS level, but to know if he's just beating up on lesser athletes, or if we might have a hidden talent hiding in Delaware, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his contact balance and elusiveness, though he has a small frame, he runs with good pad level, which helps him fall forward on runs a bit more consistently than you'd expect. Also, he is aware of his smaller frame and does a good job adjusting his body to minimize blows to help preserve himself. That being said, his smaller frame will limit contact balance against NFL-sized defenders. He can help his case by keeping his legs moving, as they can sometimes freeze when he takes on pressure. He can help his case by keeping his legs moving, as they can sometimes freeze when he takes on contact. At the very least, he needs to do a better job keeping his forward momentum going when he gets hit by contact. There are just too many times when he tried to move sideways towards contact, which let the defender easily take him down at the spot. Also, at times he can show off some good cuts, but he generally is a bit clunky with his change direction ability and can sometimes lose his footing. He also just often lacked creativity in open space, which limits him as a playmaker. So Yarns ended up earning a C+ for his contact balance and a B- for his elusiveness. For his receiving and pass blocking, just as he isn't afraid of contact as a rusher, he also isn't afraid of contact as a blocker. He's a willing blocker and does a good job identifying his assignment. Also, he consistently uses his hands and doesn't resort to poor quality lunges like some other smaller backs tend to do. As a pass catcher, he has a lot of promise, as he has experience running routes past the line of scrimmage and showed great ball tracking skills to finish catches when targeted. Though not all of his routes are polished right now, he can run some pretty solid slant and wheel routes, which he showed off during the season and at the Senior Bowl. When he catches the ball, he is comfortable catching the ball away from his body and will catch it with good hand technique. Now, like I mentioned before, as he had good receiving yard totals, he had just modest reception totals. I know scheme definitely plays a big part in it, but I would have really liked to see him involved a bit more on a regular basis, given how much better of an athlete he is compared to a lot of the competition he faced. Also, he did take advantage of that better athleticism in his route running, as he often won with good speed rather than good cuts or deception. On the note of passing downs, while he did a decent job holding up against FCS level competition in pass protection, his current technique and frame will likely not hold up in the NFL. So he will need to work to get more knee bend for better leverage and get a more sturdy base to have a better anchor. Also, he can improve the timing with his punch and hip roll. That could also help him extend the duration of his blocks. So with the upside he has as a pass catcher, Yarns earned a B for his receiving. His willingness to a blocker is also good enough to be able to earn him a C for his pass blocking. For his vision and ball handling, he is able to accurately read leverage his blocks around the line of scrimmage and does a good job using his blocks downfield. He also runs with good use of tempo and does a good job pressing the line of scrimmage to bounce his runs outside and win with his speed. Also, although I didn't have a lot of film to go off of, he does need to have a good tool set to be a good zone runner, or at least is a good plant and go runner. However, he does show indecisiveness in zones at times, as he doesn't look too comfortable squeezing through tight spaces and often try to look for larger holes to attack, or would just bounce his run outside. He also have lapses finding cutback lanes and hugging his blocks. Sometimes he did a good job hugging his blocks, and other times he was a mile away. As I mentioned before, he was able to make it through the entire 2024 season without having a fumble. So Yarn's solid vision and zone runs earned him a B- for his vision. Also with no fumbles, he of course earned an A for his ball handling. For his future role in athleticism, there's a lot to like about Marcus Yarn's game, and I can definitely understand if he becomes a trendy sleeper running back in the weeks leading up to an NFL draft. He is a great athlete with good foot speed and explosiveness that translates to him being a good one-cut zone runner. He also has a lot of upside as a pass catcher and could be very dangerous in the right system. However, while he tested well, he isn't very elusive in space and has a small frame that impacts his ability to avoid tackles, even at the FCS level. Also, his vision can be a bit shaky at times, and I'm concerned things could move a little bit too fast for him in the NFL. Also, I'm just afraid that defenders will be too big and will make him a liability as a pass blocker, which could in turn take away his passing down opportunities. So, while there are definitely things to get excited about, I think we need to be honest and acknowledge that he is likely a project and will need some time to reach his potential. So due to having a lot of upside but a fair amount of risk, Yarns earned a B- for his future role. Also thanks to his overall great athleticism, he earned a green flag for his athleticism or RAS despite his smaller frame. As a summary of his strengths, Yarns is a very good one-cut runner and will be at his best in the NFL if he's used as such. He is great at attacking openings when he sees them and can use his athleticism to be able to blast through holes and pick up big gains. Also, though he does have a small frame, he runs with good pad level to add a bit more physicality to his runs and gives him a chance to finish runs forward. Finally, he showed a lot of promise as a pass catcher, and I'm very interested to see if an NFL coach is willing to try to unleash that side of him more in the NFL. However, a small frame will present a challenge to him succeeding in the NFL. It will definitely impact his contact balance, which already wasn't as good as I would like when he's facing FCS opponents. What adds fire to this issue is that he's too hesitant at the line and often stops his forward momentum, which gives the defense the advantage. He's often too hesitant since he sometimes will look for big holes instead of confidently hugging his blocks and cutting through small creases. Also, big play ability could go down in the NFL as he can be a bit clunky with his footwork when trying to change direction, which didn't matter as much in the FCS, but will make it easier for NFL defenders to take him down. So by taking the averages of all his grades, Yarns earned a 2.76 out of 4, which just barely gets him in my good role player tier. Marcus Yarns is a player who I think will be a popular name as a sleeper candidate for good reason. He has good athleticism, solid vision, and really interesting pass catching upside that could lead him to be a regular contributor for the right offense. His contact balance, frame, and transition from the FCS could make the transition hard, but he has a lot of traits that you just can't coach. Now it's just a matter of fit and how much NFL coaching can further elevate his game. As for a comp, I have Elijah Mitchell and Yarns comp. Both have very good straight line speed and were good zone rushers. Also, both have good pass catching ability to be able to make catches past the line of scrimmage. Both also have smaller frames but weren't afraid to take on contact. Now that fear of contact could be troubling with their size, as it can increase the risk of injuries, which we did see Mitchell struggle with. Also, both struggle with making moves in the open field and having a good anchor in pass blocking situations. Also, both don't have great contact balance, which can further limit them if the line isn't creating openings. Mitchell might feel like a high-end projection, but he also went to a perfect situation to be the lead back for the San Francisco 49ers. I think he could have been solid with other teams, but I don't think he would have seen the same success as he had there. So unless Yarns go to a perfect situation, I wouldn't be surprised if his first year is kind of treated like a redshirt year to put on some weight and adjust to the NFL. After that, though, I could see him becoming a good committee back for a team. Moving to our next back, Mario Anderson Jr. from Memphis. Starting with his basic stats, Memphis again helped another back have a very productive year as Anderson ran for 1,362 yards and 18 touchdowns, which translates to yards per carry of 5.8. He was also heavily involved as a pass catcher, making 52 receptions for 312 yards and 3 touchdowns. When looking at his highlight games against West Virginia, Tulane, Navy, and Florida State, it is important to note that he had a very easy schedule if these were his toughest matchups. Honestly, Tulane might be his toughest team that he faced all year. At the very least, Anderson did have his best game of the highlight group against that Tulane team, rushing for 177 yards and a touchdown on 24 carries. The rest of the matchups were all good to solid, with the exception of Florida State. But to be honest, Memphis' offensive line had a ton of trouble that game, giving Anderson any openings, but he was able to at least show that he can be productive as a pass catcher by making 4 receptions for 38 yards against them. That being said, to know if these stats were just due to playing weaker opponents or thanks to his quality as a player, let's start to look at some of his grades. For his contact balance and elusiveness, he loves to take it to defenders and doesn't shy away from contact. Don't let his size fool you, he can bring a ton of pop to his runs and can plow through smaller secondary defenders. He also does a good job keeping his strong legs moving through contact and has great pad level to consistently fall forward to add a few extra yards to his runs. He also has great balance and has quick feet for his size to be able to stay upright. Unfortunately, his change of direction and wiggle and space are lacking to consistently make defenders miss though. It also seems like he can be sometimes a little bit delayed in making his moves, which can cause him to often not be able to avoid tackles cleanly. He'll also sometimes just decide to plow through defenders instead of trying to make a move to try to make them miss. That worked in smaller, lighter defenders, but he had a lot less success against those bigger defenders. So Anderson ended up earning a good B for his contact balance, but a less than stellar C- for his elusiveness. For his receiving and pass blocking, while he's a good plower, he is also an effective pass catcher as his season and game lines likely indicate. He was heavily involved in the passing game thanks to his reliable hands, and he catches the ball with good hand technique while also having good ball tracking skills to secure the catch. He also looked comfortable catching the ball away from his body. What he wasn't as effective in is his pass blocking. He can sometimes miss picking up the right assignment against delayed and complex blitzes. Also, he can often get caught ducking his head and will throw his shoulder into defenders instead of using his hands. He also just doesn't do a good job setting his base, which can impact his anchor. His size also likely impacted his anchor and will only get worse in the NFL, which has me concerned this may never improve. His struggles clearly worried the coaching staff as he had limited reps as a pass blocker and was often asked to go out on routes instead. Maybe an NFL team will decide to do the same, but I also feel like it's just going to be more likely they're going to use a more dynamic player to get those opportunities. So Anderson ended up earning a very good B+ for his receiving, but unfortunately he also earned a very poor D for his pass blocking, which is tied for the worst pass blocking in this class. For his vision and ball handling, though he had to adjust to a new scheme, he still showed good vision on zone runs with a good eye for cutback lanes and was capable of planting his foot to blast through a hole. While he lacks great speed, he does have good burst to be able to blow through those holes. He also runs with good tempo and is able to press the line of scrimmage. Also, he's comfortable running inside and outside of the tackles and can get skinny to squeeze through tight and closing windows. So he had a lot of success on the ground, but he had a majority of his success and his rushes on zone runs and didn't run very many gap plays. It's possible he'd be fine in a gap scheme, but it is just something that we don't know for sure. In the rushes this year, he had some moments where he did misread the leverage of his blocks and didn't hug his blocks consistently enough. Also, he still has a bit of a tendency to bounce runs outside, which will be even less effective against faster NFL defenders. Also, for his ball handling, despite coming from Division II, he didn't see the ball security get significantly worse when he took a step up in the competition. In the final 2 seasons at the Division I level, Anderson had just a single fumble on 453 of his touches, which is really impressive. So though he did show some good fundamentals, especially in zone runs, due to the question of how he could handle a gap scheme and some lapses, he earned a B- for his vision. Also due to not fumbling in 2024, he earned an A. For his future role in athleticism or RAS, though he is a very capable rusher and has some solid vision, especially in zone runs, it's hard to see a clear path for him to get meaningful NFL playing time. The problem is that he's just an okay athlete and likely doesn't have the size to be a consistent force in the NFL. Those limitations put him at risk for either being replaced either by backs who are much better bruisers or just more explosive and dangerous in space. Having some polish can help a player earn playing time, but sometimes you need at least 1 or 2 elite traits to be able to secure playing time over competition. Also, with his limitations in the open field, potentially being limited to zone schemes, and pass protection issues, could be additional issues that make it easier to further justify playing another back over him and having him be passed up on the depth chart. So though he has some solid traits, due to having no great traits and questionable fit with some teams, he earns just a C- for his future role. For his athleticism, since I don't have testing numbers at the time of making this video, I do have to just guess for this, but he does seem to select an okay, not great athlete, which ended up earning him a yellow flag. For a summary of his strengths, he has a good eye for cutback lanes and has enjoyed a lot of success from zone runs throughout his college career. He also brings a lot of physicality as a rusher despite his smaller height, and has good contact balance that hopefully could transfer to the NFL. Also, he's a very reliable pass catcher and handled a lot of volume in 2024. A lot of the pass catchers we've talked about, we've either had to speculate how they can handle more receiving volume, but that has already at least been answered with Anderson. Speaking of volume, despite the high number of touches he had no fumbles for this year and has historically protected the ball well, so that will at least be one less variable we have to worry about for him possibly losing snaps. However, while he does have a lot of exposure to receiving, he has very little gap schemes and will need to prove to NFL teams he can handle that. Also, he will also need to find a way to avoid tackles at a better rate. He struggles to shake off tackles from bigger defenders due to his smaller height and doesn't have the quickness to be able to avoid quick defenders. So that kind of puts him into a Goldilocks type of player that he can avoid a tackle of in the NFL. Also, he will absolutely need to improve his pass blocking. He is such a liability right now, and I just can't see a team being willing to put him out there and put the quarterback at risk, especially with his limited upside he presents on the field as a pass catcher. So by taking the average of all his grades, Anderson earned a 2.48 out of 4, which puts him in my needs improvement to contribute tier and just missing out on the next tier up. Anderson is a bit hard to trust. Right now his calling cards are his vision and zone runs, contact balance, and pass catching ability. However, we don't know how reliable he is in gap runs. Also, we aren't certain if his contact balance will translate against NFL talent. And finally, while he is a good pass catcher, will a team essentially be willing to punt on him being a blocker like Memphis did? Maybe he does go to a team willing to make it work out, but it just kind of sounds like too much work than it's worth given his limited upside. As for a comp, I have Elijah McGuire as his comp. Both are smaller but thick-built backs that have solid contact balance. Both are also good pass catchers and have good ball security to give them a chance at staying on the field. However, both lack elusiveness, pass blocking ability, and upside, which may cause teams to go to a different direction. McGuire bounced around teams and struggled sticking since he didn't offer too much over other replacement options, and if Anderson doesn't improve, I think he likely will have a similar fate. Moving to our next back, Marquez Cooper from San Diego State. Let's have a look at his basic stats. We have another back with a heavy workload as he had 292 carries for 1,274 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns, which led him to having a yards per carry of just 4.4. Also, I know we're just looking at the 2024 stats, but it is worth knowing that he managed to total over 5,000 total yards in his college career, which is an impressive feat, especially since he did a majority of that in 4 years of college and didn't simply do it because he benefited from being in school for 6 years because of COVID eligibility. But anyways, he got most of those 5,000 yards thanks to his rushing totals, as we can see here, with just 20 receptions for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns in 2024. Looking at his highlighted games, he also didn't have a tough schedule and had fluctuating results in them. He had a large workload on the ground in most games with at least 16 carries in all the highlighted games, which, side note, he only had less than 16 carries in a single game in 2024, but he also didn't do very much as a pass catcher, never getting more than 2 receptions in any of these highlight games, and only getting more than 2 receptions in 3 of his 12 games for 2024. Though they didn't have a great defense, it was good to see that he had one of his best games of the season against Boise State to be able to at least get his name out there with how many people would likely be tuning in for Ashton Jeanty. So while I will say he is no Jeanty, let's check out his grades to see if he is at least a draftable running back. For his contact balance and elusiveness, while he has some limitations avoiding tackles, he does have a variety of moves he can pull off in open space. Also, his basic cut or juke is pretty successful despite not having the most explosion in his cuts. When all else fails, he does do a good job keeping his legs moving to try to pick up extra yards going forward. Unfortunately though, he has lackluster contact balance due to being upright in his approach to the line of scrimmage at times. Also, he does a fair amount of dancing going sideways at the line of scrimmage, which loses him a lot of his forward momentum and decreases how many yards he can get after contact. While he does have a variety of moves, he can sometimes be a bit uncreative and just settle for a foot race, which he typically doesn't win. When he does make a move, it isn't always successful due to his lack of explosiveness in his breaks. So Cooper is unfortunately off to a bad start with just a C- for his contact balance and C+ for his elusiveness. For his receiving and pass blocking, despite the majority of his yards coming on the ground, he is actually an underrated pass catcher. He catches the ball with good hand technique and has tough hands to be able to finish catches through contact. Also, he has good ball tracking skills and can adjust to balls away from his frame. There were even moments where he showed the ability to be able to finish catches over his shoulders, which a lot of backs in his class can't do. When he does make the catch, he also has a good transition upfield. As a blocker, he has some good recognition skills and can even catch defenders in his peripherals starting to sneak off their blocks and jump to go help him out. Also, he'll typically set a good base to have a good foundation to take on his target. That being said, while he does often get square with his target in pass protection, he often just gives a shoulder bump instead of using his hands, which leads to defenders often slipping off his block quickly. If he's continuing to have this approach, he will at least have to work to have more leverage to at least add some more bump to make these blocks more successful. So though his stats may not indicate it, he is a good pass catcher and earned a B for his receiving. However, his pass blocking left me pretty whelmed and earned just a C. For his vision and ball handling, he's a very patient runner who knows how to trust his blocks. He often is a take what the defense gives you type of running back, but ensures the offense get as much as they can thanks to him consistently hugging his blocks. He also has a good eye for leverage of his blocks and can cut around blocks in open space and shorter runs. Also, he does a good job getting skinny through tight creases in both zone and gap runs. That being said, he can be a little bit too patient at times around the line of scrimmage, which can lead to holes closing before he's able to hit them. On the flip side, when he's out in space, he can sometimes move too fast on his bigger runs and doesn't always give his blockers time to clear a path for him. Also, he can sometimes duck his head around the line of scrimmage and miss cutback lanes that could have been bigger gains. But he does at least continue to streak up backs in this group with no fumbles in 2024. So with some difficulties balancing his vision, he earned just a C+ for his vision. That being said, with no fumbles again, Cooper also earned an A for his ball handling. For his future role in athleticism or RAS, Cooper doesn't have one thing that he was great at that he did regularly, as the receiving building is his best trait, but he often didn't get to lean into that. Despite potentially only being great in one area, he is solid in a lot of other areas. Normally, I would say that would likely earn him a roster spot in the NFL, but he is just so limited athletically. Even against lower competition, he was frequently caught from behind, so I just don't think he has that top speed needed to get big plays in the NFL. Some backs can get past this if they are explosive, but his acceleration and his burst just look average at best, which makes me feel like he's unlikely to have an impact. Add in him having average contact balance, elusiveness, and vision, and it's just hard to get that excited about him. So with him lacking a great trait and being very limited athletically, he earned a D+ for his future role and a red flag for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has good patience between the tackles to be able to wait for an opening and sneak through it. Also, though he can use them better, he does have a variety of moves he can throw out in open space. He also is an underrated pass catcher, especially with ball tracking and ability to contribute down the field as a pass catcher. Also, him being solid in a lot of areas does make it a little bit easier to fit into a number of schemes. While he is a patient runner, he does sometimes need to speed up his process a little bit and not let defenders get him while he's stopped or moving sideways, as that loss of forward momentum cost him on his contact balance and additional yards he could get on the ground. Also, he has a lot of areas that he needs to clean up with his technique as a pass blocker to be able to have a chance to earn passing down snaps and play up to his potential as a pass catcher. Regardless, his opportunities in those situations may be limited since he lacks the explosion in his cuts and general athleticism to justify using him as a pass catcher over other faster, quicker playmakers. So by taking the average of all his grades, Cooper earned a 2.38 out of 4, which puts him in my needs improvement to contribute tier. Cooper has some faults, but his lack of speed and explosiveness are likely the final nail in the coffin for me. He's still graded better than some of the other backs due to his well-roundedness, but I can understand NFL teams taking players below him that have greater upside. I think Cooper's best chance at making an impact is getting more involved as a pass-catching back, but his lack of athleticism after the catch may not be appealing to NFL teams. So it's just kind of hard to see him going into a situation earning snaps over an alternative on the roster. As for a comp, I have LaMichael Pirine as Cooper's comp. Both are well-rounded players but lack the great athleticism to be great playmakers in the NFL. Also, both are good pass catchers, but may get passed up on passing downs for faster, quicker players. Pirine pounced around the league since he is an okay player, but doesn't have the traits to keep him on a roster over other options. I have a feeling things will be similar for Cooper, but that being said, it would be a good start for Cooper to at least get signed to a team, since I think there's always a chance he could find a way to impress the coaching staff and have a better fate than Pirine. Moving to our next back, Montrell Johnson Jr. from Florida. Looking at his basic stats, we're seeing a much smaller workload compared to a lot of the other backs in this set, but Johnson also missed some time due to injury, so that played a role in that. As for the touches he did get, he had 100 carries that went for 593 yards and 6 touchdowns for a yard per carry of 5.9. Also, he breaks our streak of having no fumbles with a single fumble this year. As a pass catcher, he is pretty underwhelming with a decent 13 receptions when accounting for his missed time, but a measly 64 yards that he got off of them, which led to having a yards per catch of 4.9. Looking at his individual games, his ability to help as a rusher showed with 100-yard games against Ole Miss and Miami, and a solid game rushing for 85 yards against Tennessee, and then just a decent game against UCF. That being said, against UCF, he was very active as a pass catcher with 6 receptions for 24 yards, which is solid. The problem with that stat line is that means he only had 7 receptions in his other 8 games, which is pretty putrid. Also, I think it is worth noting that he was in a committee with freshman running back Jaden Baugh, and Baugh often looked better than Johnson, similar to Etienne looking better than Johnson last year. I think that's one of my issues with Johnson, is that it always just feels like he's the second choice to a more talented player. I don't see that changing in the NFL. However, let's take a look at his grades to see if there is any truth to that. For his contact balance and elusiveness, at times he can absolutely plow through defenders with his strengths at good pad level. He also typically keeps his legs moving, which often leads to him finishing his runs forward. Though he has good strength, it can sometimes be inconsistent since he doesn't always have the power to drive to finish runs going forward or break tackles. Also, while he did test well at the combine, it kind of caught me by surprise since it really doesn't show in film very often. In his games, he can come off as a bit of a slow accelerator and was often caught from behind. Also, his change of direction is a bit clunky at times, and he has trouble making defenders miss in the hole and in space. So Johnson gets a solid start with a B- for his contact balance, but had a very poor elusiveness grade of just a D, which is the lowest of the entire 25 class. For his receiving and pass blocking, he's a pretty solid pass catcher who uses good hand technique and has reliable hands. He can even do some more subtle things like move in open areas when he's out on his routes instead of being frozen and staying covered. When he does make a catch, he has good transition upfield and has good spatial awareness to be prepared to make a move on a defender or be ready to plow through them. He also is a solid pass blocker who does a good job identifying his target and getting square with them. He also set a good base to give himself a chance to be able to lay a quality, strong hit. Also, he has good size and strength to be a reliable force in pass blocking situations with a bit of tune-up. Speaking of that tune-up in pass protection, I like to see him consistently use leverage and proper hand placement a bit more frequently. A lot of times he sets himself up well but kind of botches things at initial contact and will lose his block. He will also often lose his block and miss time his punch, which will also lead to him needing to chase his defender. While he's a solid pass catcher, he doesn't run clean routes, and his clunky athleticism sometimes can make him unable to get consistent separation as a route runner. So Johnson was able to get back on track with a B- in receiving and pass blocking. For his vision and ball handling, he has a good eye for cutback lanes and take advantage of that to be able to get a runway and build some speed and momentum. However, he does often look too indecisive when things are getting congested around the line of scrimmage. He can also sometimes have trouble reading the leverage of his blocks and will just charge into his blockers or a defender. In addition to those issues, I'd also like to see him run with more tempo and hug his blocks more consistently. Also, as I mentioned before, he did have a single fumble this year, with one fumble on his 113 touches. So with some deficiencies, Johnson earned just a C+ in vision, and then scored another B- for his ball handling. For his future role in athleticism or RAS, it's just kind of hard to find something that he absolutely excels at, which I think is part of why he has struggled to earn a bigger workload throughout his career. He has okay contact balance, receiving ability, and vision, and he is a great athlete as the testing indicates, but he seems to struggle to put it all together on the field. The big thing that I think holds him back is his inability to escape tackles. If he could evade tackles and use that athleticism to get big gains more consistently, then I think we would have a more exciting back on our hands. But as he is now, he's just kind of frustrating and feels just a bit too average. So with Johnson being about average to above average across the board so far, it's not surprising that he earned a C for his future role grade. Although it doesn't always show up on the field, he did test very well and earned a green flag. For a summary of his strengths, he runs a great pad level and can run with a lot of strength to plow through defenders at times thanks to his size. That being said, he also has soft hands to be able to use as a pass catching option and help raise his floor a bit. Also, he should be in a good position to be able to use as a passing down back, thanks to being a good pass blocker, with the potential of even becoming a great one with his frame and size. That being said, I do think there's a fair amount that does cap his upside and utility to a coaching staff. He is indecisive at the line of scrimmage, which slows him down and makes him easier to take down. Also, despite his athletic testing, he is pretty stiff and has a hard time making defenders miss in open space. Speaking of athleticism, I feel like he might be a player who people will go back and watch thanks to his combine performance, but I feel like they're going to go and watch him and feel like they were tricked since those athletic numbers just don't always show in his film. Finally, outside of his athleticism, there just doesn't seem to be something he's great at, which does make it hard to see that high of upside for him, which could make it hard for him to carve out a role with the team. So by taking the average of all his grades, Johnson earned a 2.29 out of 4, which puts him in my needs improvement to contribute tier. Maybe Johnson will get drafted thanks to his combine performance, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes undrafted, honestly. With such a deep running back class, I think his chances of getting drafted are even lower. He at least has a good build to potentially help on special teams and as a tackler, but I think there'll just be too many backs that are either more athletic in games, stronger in their contact balance, or better pass catchers and playmakers in open space that teams will want to use those draft picks for instead. As for a comp, I have Zamir White at Johnson's comp. While both White and Johnson have good power and tested well at the combine, they look like slow accelerators in their games, which makes me worried about how their test results will actually translate to the NFL. Both were also more contributors on passing downs than playmakers. White was supposed to take on a bigger role with the Raiders, but continued to get passed up by other backs. I think Johnson could be in for a similar fate, as I just have a hard time buying into him being a productive NFL running back. Moving to our final back of the group, and the biggest name, and even the biggest body as well, Ollie Gordon II from Oklahoma State. After rushing for 1,732 yards and 21 touchdowns, while also adding 39 receptions for 330 yards and a touchdown in 2023, Gordon had one of the biggest regressions of any running back, and honestly, any player in the draft, finishing with just 880 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns on 190 carries and 29 receptions for 179 yards and a touchdown. Now, for context, he did have 95 more rushes in 2023, which is part of why the rushing total is significantly different, but he also averaged 6.1 yards per carry in 2023, compared to his 4.6 for 2024. Now, I will say what did impact his play was poor offensive line play. It was really rough this year and barely gave him any openings, and I do think it's fair to point to that being part of the issue. That being said, there are other factors that we'll talk about later that should also be factored in, but I do want to at least bring up his weight now. For his weight, he reportedly played between 210 to 215 pounds for 2023, then was reported at 225 pounds for the 2024 season, and then was weighed at 233 pounds for the Senior Bowl, and now at least he's back to his 226 pounds at the combine. So even at his combine weight, that's a 20-pound increase, which helps explain a lot of the areas of improvements that we'll talk about later on. But let's first look at his highlighted games, since this really shows the duality of Gordon's season. When people were losing hope for Gordon, it was in the first half of the season due to his putrid totals like he put up against Utah, rushing for just 42 yards on 11 carries and making 3 receptions for 16 yards. Now, that Kansas State game immediately followed that Utah game, so at least he did respond well, but he was averaging just 2.6 yards per carry through his first 6 games. Then he was able to put together what was easily his best game of the season against BYU, but unfortunately he also got injured that game. The rest of his games after BYU were a bit closer to his first 6 games, with the exception of his Texas Tech game as highlighted here, as well as his TCU game. So if we're ignoring his South Dakota game, since they are a lot less competition, that equals out to just 4 good games that he had this year. That huge regression after being so productive last year had Gordon go from being some people's top running back in this class to outside a lot of people's top 10 for the position. So let's see how he graded out to see where he falls in mine. For his contact balance and elusiveness, despite putting that weight on and lacking some of his previous explosiveness, he still showed some moments of good athleticism, including jukes and hurdles. Also, his increased weight did help improve his contact balance. He sometimes had poor pad level, but he ran with great pad level in the second half of the year. In the second half of the season, he also had improved balance and did a good job anticipating contact. But like I said, with that added weight, he did seem to lose some of his burst with his feet looking slow and often making him look like he was in quicksand. That impacted his ability to make defenders miss in open space, and overall impacted his ease of changing direction. It also decreased his ability to blow through a hole or an opening. Along with that decreased burst, he also just seemed to lack creativity in open space, and would often just try to go through defenders with varying results. And while he did have good results in the second half of the year, he really struggled to get much push, especially in short yard situations in the first half of the year, due to being too upright of a runner with poor pad level. So his added weight helped him get to a B- for his contact balance, but it was at the sacrifice of elusiveness, which dropped to a C-. For his receiving and pass blocking, he took major steps forward as a pass catcher this year with improved hand technique and focus leading to no drops per PFF. He also had really good ball tracking skills that even let him make plays on poorly placed balls. Once he catches the ball, he has a fairly smooth transition to break up field. Finally, while he can clean up some bad tendencies in the pass protection, he does do a good job identifying his assignment and getting square with them. When he does remain upright as a pass blocker, he sets a good base and has good timing with his hip roll. That being said, while he can look good as a pass blocker at times, he is really frustrating for me to watch since he has a bad tendency to just settle for chop blocks on most of his block attempts. For those unaware why it isn't ideal to do chop blocks can often work initially when the defender isn't expecting it, but after 1 or 2, the defender can anticipate and just easily sidestep it. This was also very easy for some defenders to read with how often Gordon would telegraph it and go to them, so that would make it really easy for them just to be able to make that quick adjustment and just get right past him. In the time he did stay upright, he would do a fair amount of ducking that needs to be cleaned up as well. Also, while he did show improved hands, he may likely be limited to just dump-offs and screen passes in the NFL based on how Oklahoma State used him. It's also frustrating to see him catch some screen passes because he's just so often not able to get more than expected yards, even though he's supposed to be this big play weapon. So due to being an improved pass catcher, he was able to earn a B+ for his receiving. And due to his high tendency to go to chop blocks and sometimes having some technical issues when he stays upright, he earned just a C for his pass blocking. For his vision and ball handling, his vision looks solid and he has a lot of experience running in both gap and zone schemes, which will help him transition to the NFL. He showed a good understanding of reading leverage of his blocks and did a good job hugging his blocks as well. There weren't too many times he could show it off, but he did show a good eye to be able to set up blocks downfield, and the few times he was able to get to the second level cleanly. Also, while he did have struggles in the first half of the year, he did a great job taking what the defense gave him in the second half of the year. That being said, the first half of the year did still happen and it was rough as he was often caught going sideways a lot due to trying to go for big gains, which was made a bit worse since he was a bit slow in identifying cutback lanes. In general, I think he can also be a bit slow in his process and he can run with some tempo, but at times he's a bit tepid, leading to some missed opportunities. Again though, his improvement in the second half of the year is noteworthy and should also still be put in consideration as a whole with everything combined. And finally, he did have a fumble rate of 1 fumble every 110 touches. So if we were to just base his vision grade off the first half of the year, it would have been a very poor grade. But thankfully, he did salvage it in the second half of the year, and I believe in trusting progressions, which ended up earning him a B for his vision. Also, with his fumble rate being slightly above average, he earned a B- for his ball handling. For his future role in athleticism or RAS, I've talked a fair amount about his athleticism, but if you check out his RAS score, he technically scored an 8.16, which gives him a green flag. That being said, his size did do a lot of the heavy lifting, with his testing results in 40-yard dash time and jumps being average to just barely above average. Also, his 40-yard, 10-yard split and his jumps also confirm my suspicion that he is lacking in burst and is a bit of a slow accelerator. The weight likely played a role in that, but I personally wasn't impressed with his ability with either last year, and the weight just exacerbated things. Now, he definitely isn't a bad athlete, but I just don't think he's elite like his RAS may suggest. But outside of athleticism, he's at the very least seems comfortable handling all the duties that could be asked of him in the NFL. He has experience in zone and gap, and he has experience as a pass catcher and blocker while also having enough of running ability to be able to pick up yards. He arguably wasn't that great in a lot of areas this year, but he likely isn't going to be a player who makes coaching staffs pull out their hair from frustration, unless he just keeps going for those chop blocks or keeps struggling to shed tacklers. But if he does go to the right situation, he could maybe get a heavy workload early on since he does have the ability and size to be a 3-down back. So with being able to handle a lot of duties, Gordon earned a B- for his future role grade. Also, while he earned a green flag for his athleticism or RAS, I again want to reiterate that I think this is admittedly a bit of a fluky one, since even though RAS is the best measure at this time that I've found, it also just isn't perfect and can have examples like this. For a summary of his strengths, though he struggled with his vision early in the year, he saw the field very well and had a better balance between being patient and acting urgently in the second half. His contact balance also got a lot better in the second half of the year, as he wasn't as hesitant around the line of scrimmage and focused on getting downhill. He also has a lot of good traits that should help him as a pass catcher. Also, he has some technique issues to fix as a blocker, but he has the framework and size to be a great pass blocker. Finally, while he isn't as good of an athlete as his RAS may suggest, he still shows some impressive flashes of athleticism with good cuts and hurdles. The big thing that may limit how often he flashes those feats of athleticism is what weight he plays at. With the added weight for the 2024 season, he looks slow-footed at times and may benefit from trimming down again. Also, he needs to work on not doing so many chop blocks and stay up to deliver cleaner hits. In the opposite sense, he needs to continue to stay down as a rusher and keep his pads low to help maximize his strength and have a better chance at winning the leverage battle at his size. I also want to see him keep that consistency from the second half of the year going forward. Finally, I want to see more of those exciting moves in space to make defenders miss, especially when he catches the ball in space. So by taking the average of all his grades, Gordon earned a 2.57 out of 4, but puts him in my may have a future role tier. I mentioned his improved play in the second half of the year a lot because I do think it's important when evaluating him. If you watch a lot of Gordon in the first half of the year, he may look like a clear day 3 pick, maybe even undrafted to some people. However, in the second half of the year, he looked like a much better version of himself and looked like a possible day 2 player. So how people and teams value Gordon may depend on how much weight they put into his early half struggles compared to his second half progressions. Also, how he answers questions about his weight will also be interesting to monitor. Maybe the team felt that him putting weight on would help him, but it seemed to just hamper what he could do and made him a lot less exciting. But maybe I'm biased as I still have nightmares from Eddie Lacy's weight gains as a Packer fan, and I just hope it isn't a trend towards a similar situation for Gordon. But again, maybe more of a discussion between the player and the team to be able to see what really went on there. As for a comp, he's a bit of a hard player to comp since he's a bit of a weird tweener where he truly isn't a big back and has a little bit more wiggle than a lot of the bigger backs that are more his size. However, I feel TJ Yeldon is a very good comp for Gordon. Both Yeldon and Gordon have bigger size but still have good foot speed and a bit of wiggle to make them a bit more interesting. Also, both are good pass catchers and have good vision. However, both also ran with poor pad level that made them seem like smaller backs. Both can also sometimes take a bit too much time seeking bigger openings instead of just consistently taking what the defense gave them. Also, both did have some fumble issues that did cost them opportunities, and both even regressed their final year in college. Finally, both to me at least came off as solid backs, but I just have a hard time seeing either becoming big contributors for a team. Which I think that'll be the biggest things for people and potentially even teams to come to terms with. I think a lot of people are down on Gordon since there were some that viewed him as a top back of this deep class, but now with his fall, people are soured on him to the point where I think he's potentially a bit underrated. I certainly don't think he's a great back as it's obvious from my grading and eval, but I do think he could help fill a role for a team that wants to use him as a receiving back. And that's all for this set of backs. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the backs in the comments and who you think I'm too high or low on. This is now part 5 of 7, so we're already getting near the end. But to be sure you don't miss any of the other remaining parts or any other positional series, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack so I'll have the full written eval for each player out at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.